Hi, my name is Lynn Thompson. I'm the president of Cold Steel Incorporated and the chief instructor of our knife fighting training program. Over the last 10 years, I've spent an enormous amount of time sparring with my training partners in order to develop a method of fighting where we can cut and stab our opponent without being injured in the process. During this developmental period, I have borrowed heavily from the Filipino martial arts, including Lameko Eskrima, Western boxing, Western fencing, including epee and saber fencing, and Kenjutsu, or Japanese sword fighting. In the end, what we came up with was a long-range fighting method where we use footwork, timing, rhythm, balance, speed, and strategy to defeat our opponent. In the following instruction, I'm going to cover our basic long-range knife fighting program. But before we get started, I want to cover the following. The first is the 3 ranges a knife fight can occur in. Second are the types of knives you may find in the hands of an opponent and their advantages and disadvantages. Third is why your fighting knife must be both strong and sharp. Fourth is what your actual goal should be in a knife fight. And following this, we will go into a discussion of how to grip the fighting knife. There's a number of different grips that you can use, and also how to adopt our basic fighting stance or posture. The most dangerous range that you can encounter an opponent armed with a knife at is close range. Now, when I'm talking about close range, I mean you're so close to your opponent that he doesn't even have to take a single step. If Ron hands me this training fighter here, I can cut him and I don't have to move. He can cut me or stab me and he doesn't have to take even a single step. He doesn't even hardly have to lean. He can just put his knife out and cut you. The problem is that initiation beats reaction time. You have no reaction time at close range. An opponent doesn't need to be skilled. He doesn't need to be physically strong. He doesn't know how to have to be able to joint lock you or to punch or kick you or elbow you or knee you. He doesn't need to know Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He doesn't have to have any fighting skills. All he needs are 2 attributes: speed and desire. That's all he needs. We want to avoid this range whenever we can because it doesn't allow us to use our footwork and our timing, our rhythm, our balance, our strategy, all of the other fighting elements that we're going to develop over the course of the next this program. It doesn't allow us to use those because we're so bloody close to them. The other thing I hate about close range is when people aren't skilled fighters, they tend to want to trade here. Quite often, you'll be facing an opponent that doesn't know anything about knife fighting other than he wants to kill you at that moment. So he may not have any regard or respect for his own body's safety. So he can go up there and just stab you, and you stab him back, and you stab him, and he stabs you. Look, you end up trading at this range. So it's a very dangerous range. We want to avoid it in our long-range knife fighting program like the plague. I'm not saying you're not going to have to find yourself fighting at that range sometimes, and you're still going to have to fight there, but we want to avoid it whenever possible. Ron and I are going to give you a brief demonstration of fighting at close range and how horrible and how difficult it is to do it successfully. But before we just begin, I want to stick in this little safety statement. You're going to hear me refer to safety throughout this presentation. The main thing to protect is your eyes. I'm going to leave off my fencing mask so that I can talk. I'm going to break my own rule. Don't you ever do this at home. Don't practice knife fighting, especially any type of sparring or training for sparring, without having a 3 weapons rated fencing mask on like Ron has right here. This will give you total protection to your face and keep you from being injured. And now we're going to fight briefly at close range. Another dangerous range you want to avoid whenever possible is medium range. By medium range, I mean you're close enough to your opponent that only a single step separates you from your opponent. In other words, I'm only 1 step away from Ron. I take 1 step and I can cut him. I take 1 step and I can stab him. At medium range, you only have a fraction of more reaction time than you do at close range. It's not the optimum range to fight at if you want to emerge from the fray unscathed. In a moment, we're going to give you a brief demonstration of what this looks like fighting at medium range. The distance we prefer to use in knife fighting is what we call long range. At long range, there's 2 or more steps separating you from your opponent. At this distance, you have a chance to use your skill and your footwork and timing and balance and rhythm and all your attributes that you've developed over years of practice to lure and trick your opponent into making a mistake so that you can cut and stab him and at a position or a moment in time where it's very difficult for him to counterattack or to cut or stab or harm you in any way. We're going to demonstrate this briefly now. I used a fléché to make a rapid advance on Ron and cut him at a moment in time when he wasn't ready. There you saw a classic. I put forward pressure on Ron, just staying outside of range. I saw him lean back. I got the cut into his face. Knives come in all shapes and sizes. You can encounter little knives, medium-sized knives, big knives on the street. I want to now take a moment and run through some of the different categories of knives that you may encounter in the hands of an opponent on the street. The first category are what I call mini knives. A mini knife is a little tiny knife like this that could fit on your keychain. It's so small that you can hide it in your waistband. You can hide one like this Urban Pal. Quite often you can hide this underneath your collar, behind a belt buckle, in the cuff of your pants. You can hide it under the tongue of your shoe. You can put it under the instep of your shoe. You can tape it to the laces of your shoe. A little knife like this can be hidden on your body so well that you'll have to have a really expert person to frisk you to find a knife this small. Don't ever underestimate one of these little knives. Yes, they're not going to make a 5-inch deep, 20-inch long cut in you, but a knife like this can absolutely destroy your face in one slash. So you have to give these things a lot of respect. Their big advantage is their concealability and their lightweight. You can carry one of these 24/7. You can carry this your entire life and you'll never get tired of it. It has no weight, has no bulk, it's totally thin, has a real small profile. And you need to be aware that these knives are out on the street. Now, that doesn't say that this knife is always a weapon. 99% of the time, this knife's going to be used for utility tasks. I mean, I can't tell you how many pop tops I've opened with my Urban Pal on my keyring, or how many boxes I've opened with an Urban Pal. So most of the time, it's going to be used for utility, but it can also be used for self-defense. It goes between your fingers like that. It locks in there. You can use it with a straight lock wrist and punch with it and slash with it. Extremely difficult to take away from you. Very hard to disarm somebody with such a small knife. First of all, it's locked between your fingers, and your fingers curl all the way around the handle, and your thumb locks on the top like that. Let's roll in for a close-up on that. Again, look how that knife is secured in my palm. It goes between my ring finger and my middle finger. Those fingers curl around it, roll up, my thumb comes down and locks that little knife in place. It's not much blade to sticking out from my fingers to try to get a hold of to disarm it. Not a lot of leverage for your opponent to work with there, and this knife will look like a chainsaw in action. So you need to be aware that your opponent may have one or more mini knives secreted upon his person, so that you can always be aware that even though you cut that knife out of his hand, he may have one or more knives still that you're going to have to deal with. Here's another little one, our Super Edge. Again, very easy to conceal, very lightweight. Comes with a keychain. You can wear it underneath your clothes on a lanyard, suspended around your neck. You can tape it and pin it. You can pin it underneath a tie. I frequently wear one pinned underneath a tie. So it's another little tiny knife that can do a lot of damage in a heartbeat. It's very concealable, very easy to use. Again, this knife, 99% of the time, it's going to be used for legitimate purposes. So it's not necessarily an evil thing. It's a very useful tool, but it can be used for righteous self-defense and emergency very effectively. Next up, the continuum of force, if you will, is a neck knife. A neck knife is primarily worn suspended from a lanyard around the neck. This is our mini tack. Has a flat craton handle. It's very thin. It's not even a ½ inch thick in its thickest part. It has a lot of cutting power. It's got a 4-inch blade. A very light knife, though. This whole knife and sheath only weighs a few ounces. I think it's about 3½ ounces total. Very easily to conceal. You need to know about these knives and what they can do. Another knife that's really popular is something like this, an integral handle and blade model. This is called our Spike. It has a thread-wrapped handle. It weighs a couple ounces. Has a really nice sheath. It's easy to hide this in a boot top, in the small of your back, up your sleeve. It's another 24/7 knife. It's very easy to carry. It has tremendous penetrating power, especially when you put it in reverse grip and you cap the end of the handle right here, put your thumb over that. You get tremendous power in all of your thrusts. You should be aware of these little neck knives. A boot knife is kind of fallen out of favor in the last 15, 20 years. It's been upstaged by tactical folder. I think that's a shame because a boot knife is 20 times the knife a tactical folder is. First of all, it's got no pivot pin, so it's going to be terrifically more strong than a tactical folder. The blade doesn't fold, so you have a solid tang that goes all the way through the butt. It's very, very strong. It's not going to break in combat if it's well made. You usually have a 4 or 5-inch blade. Most boot knives have a 5-inch blade. This is our Coben. This has a 5-inch blade. It'll go through a 1-inch rope like it was butter. Take a $1 rope. We can hang that thing up and cut right through it with this knife. That's enough stopping power to cut a man's arm off at the wrist. So you can have pretty good stopping power with it. It's got enough blade length to reach most of the vital organs on the body. It's light enough to be carried all the time. Its only downside is that it doesn't have a really long blade. 4 or 5-inch blade isn't ideal for a fighting knife. It's a little too short. And it doesn't have much weight. This knife only weighs 4 ounces. So it's not going to do the massive cuts that our Laredo Bowie and our Gurkha Kukri would do. And we're going to come to those in a minute. But if you can talk yourself into carrying a boot knife instead of a tactical folder, I heartily suggest you do that. If there's any way that you can train yourself to carry a boot knife instead of a tactical folder, you'll be a lot better armed. Now, boot knives come in all shapes and sizes, and here's another model. This is our Peacekeeper 2. It has a 5-inch blade. It's double-edged, has a craton handle, comes with a nice Conceal-X sheath, and it offers a tremendously good grip, a lot better grip than you're going to get in any tactical folder. It has a double integral guard to keep your hand from going forward when you're thrusting, and very few folding knives have anything like that to protect your hand. And you can deliver a very effective cutting or slashing attack with this knife. Again, it's not going to be as devastating as a full-size fighting knife, but it can be very effective. And this is something to keep in mind, that your opponent may be armed with a knife like this. You know, he might have this in his arsenal. We also have a Desperado. This has an S-curved blade. It's very effective for slashing and thrusting. It's got a very cute point. You can hold it like this in a saber grip, or you can hold it like a push dagger. A very versatile fighting knife. It's got this egg-shaped handle, which allows you to draw it from the sheath in a moment's notice. It's very easy. Someone can really, if that's skill, can pull their coat back and have this thing in action in a lot less than half a second. I'm talking about a third of a second. That thing's on its way cutting you. So it's really an effective boot knife, and I much prefer it to any folding knife. Let's face facts, though. Most of you are not going to carry a boot knife, and you're not going to carry a full-size fighting knife. Although I'm going to try to talk you into it, but you're probably not going to do it. What almost everybody wants to carry now is what is generally called a tactical folding knife. I see these in sizes of blades from 3 inches to 4 inches. 4 inches is about as big as most people want to carry. I think they're a real mistake carrying such a short blade, but that's about as big a knife that most people want to carry. Here's a tactical folder that we recommend. Of course, I'm going to promote my own products, but these have been extensively tested, and we can prove that this is a really strong, sharp, effective tactical folder. It has a 4-inch blade. This one has our Ultra Lock. It has a generous handle. You can get your full hand on this handle. A lot of people are carrying tactical folders out there now with 3-inch blades and little tiny handles. Now, my hand is only medium in size. A lot of you people out there have a lot larger hands, and if you're carrying a little 3-inch blade, you don't have much control over it. Your hand is way too big for that little handle. So you want to, when you're thinking about a tactical folder, you want to look at that knife and look at your hand and think, hey, can I really get a good grip on this thing or not, or is it really too small? I really heartily suggest that if you're going to carry a tactical folder, that you carry one with a 4-inch or longer blade. A 3-inch blade is really difficult to get enough edge into the target to stop that incoming arm or incoming hand. It just can't deliver enough blade, and it's too light. A 4-inch blade is really about the minimum that you can really effectively carry on the street. So I heartily suggest this. Look for a knife that has a really strong lock, because people don't stand still in a knife fight, and we're going to get to that in a minute, why your knife should be strong and sharp. But tactical folders, there's a whole bunch of them out there, and there's a whole lot of people going to hell for lying about their tactical folders. Some of those big names and those custom knife makers, when you put their knife in a vise and you put 70, 80, 100 pounds of weight 4.5 inches from their pivot pin, you're going to be surprised at how many of them blow up and break and fail. There's a whole lot of lying going on in the knife industry, and the magazines that you read aren't telling you the truth. So you need to buy from a really reputable maker that actually tests his products and can prove how strong his knife is. Here's another tactical folder that I like. This is our triple action. As you can see, you can open it in a heartbeat. It opens faster than a ballet song, faster than a switchblade. It opens at light speed. It's got a tremendous safe locking mechanism. The blade, when it's closed, is totally encapsulated by the cover, so you can carry it in complete safety. You can use it as a pocket or Yawara stick to hit with on either side. So it allows you to start at the bottom of the force continuum and use percussion blows to defend yourself, and then work up to using the edge, and at last use the point. So it gives you a lot of responses. I also like our new tie light. This knife has a Zytel handle with steel liners. It's got a really reliable leaf spring lock. It's got a very acute stiletto-like point. That point is sharp as a needle, but it's got tremendous cutting ability. And we'll just come in here for a close-up, and if the camera can see me shaving hair from my arm. Now, all these knives right out of the box that Cold Steel makes are this sharp. It's a very, very sharp knife. You wouldn't think a blade that's this narrow would cut that well. See, it has a fairly short bevel, but we've really got the edge geometry down on this knife, and we can get it really, really sharp. It's very pointy and very strong. Very easy to make an insertion or a devastating cut with this knife. The disadvantage to tactical folders is, and again, I want to emphasize this, they're not as strong as a boot knife. They're not as strong as a full-sized fighting knife and a big knife. They're not as effective. They're a heck of a lot better than fingernails now. Don't get me wrong. I'd much rather have a tactical folder than just standing here with my knuckles. But they're not as strong, and they're not as effective as a boot knife or a full-size fighting knife. But they're still a very good weapon to have in your arsenal of self-defense. Let's move up to full-size fighting knives. The more I train with a fighting knife, and the more I practice, and the more I actually use a fighting knife, the more enamored I am with the double-edged. When I started my knife-making career back in 1980, I didn't like double edges because so many of the ones that I'd seen, the tips easily broke off them. But years ago, I designed a full-size double-edged fighter, this Taipan, that has a strong yet acute point. The point's very resistant to breaking, but the knife is very sharp on both sides. It's capable of delivering devastating cutting power. It's got a tapered pommel to hit with, so you can use butt strokes with it. It's got a nice long grip. The grip is oval in shape so that you can really lock your hand around it. Whenever possible, I earnestly urge you to carry a full-size fighting knife. A full-size fighting knife like this Taipan will stop an incoming knife arm and disable it with one stroke. One stroke like that, finished. That arm is finished. Okay? You can't necessarily do that with a boot knife. You certainly can't necessarily do that with a tactical folder. And a mini knife, you even have less likelihood of being totally successful in disabling an incoming arm with one stroke. But when you're carrying a razor-sharp, double-edged fighting knife like this, I'm going to come out here, have the camera come over here, and just show what this knife can do. Look at that. Let's run in there, camera. And you're going to see me in this presentation, that little bald spot. And every time you see that bald spot, you'll know how sharp your knife has to be. Has to be razor sharp like this. I like a tactical full-size fighting knife to have at least a 6-inch blade. Better is a 7 or 7.5, even an 8-inch blade. The longer the blade, excuse me, the more effective it's going to be, up to the point that it becomes too cumbersome to carry it or conceal it. Again, here's another nice double-edged blade. This was, we call this our Black Bear. Originally, this was designed by custom knife maker Bob Lovelace, and this is one of the quintessential fighting knives that's ever been designed. It's got full double edges, clip point. It's got this sub-hilt, which I really, really like. The sub-hilt gives you better control when you're thrusting and when you're recovering from a cut. It allows you to overcome centrifugal force and keep that knife securely in your hand. See, it has a little turn up here. We call this a return, and it has the sub-hilt here. So your fingers slide between that, and your little finger is right here in front of that little projection there, and that helps keep that knife securely in your hand. Double-edged knife gives you tremendous advantages in a knife fight. You can cut forward, backward, you can cut down, you can cut up, any motion you make with that knife, you can turn that edge into it. So if you miss a stroke, you can pull back. If you miss a stroke, you can drop and cut the person. If you miss a stroke, you can turn the edge and pull it back. It gives you a lot of advantages. Paul Vunak, a famous martial artist that's trained with my friend Dan Inosanto for years, once said, carrying a fighting knife with a single edge is like carrying a Beretta 92 with half the magazine full. That's a really full-size fighting handgun and 9mm caliber. It holds about 15 rounds in its double column magazine. He said it's like carrying the gun with half the magazine full. I feel the same way. If you're going to carry a fighting knife, I prefer you to carry a double edge. It's twice the power of a single-edged knife. The only disadvantage double edges have is their points are, by necessity, a little bit weaker than a single edge. So you have to keep that in mind. If you want a single-edged knife, though, carrying something like our Tanto, it's hard to beat something like this. This is a full-size fighting knife, has a 7.5-inch blade. It's got a really nice craton handle that feels sticky to the touch so that you can get a tremendous grip on it. It's got this skull-crushing pommel. It's tapered, and it comes to almost a point, and it's a little bit thinner right here. I don't know if the camera can come in there and see that. The reason for that is we want to focus the power of a butt stroke in one small area, so that if you see a little opportunity to hit with the pommel or butt here, you can destroy a hand. You can break the bones in a hand, you can break the bones in a face, and do a lot of damage with just a very small, quick movement. It's got a nice Tsuba style guard to keep your hand from going forward on the blade. It's got the Tanto shaped blade that I invented back in 1980. It's got a 23-degree curve right here on the primary edge that intersects the secondary edge here, and it creates a secondary point right here, right in this spot right here. And we use this secondary point to snap cut with. I'll use that point and drive it into my opponent's hand or into his face or another target, and that cuts a V-shaped wound way out of proportion to what you'd think you'd get from such a movement. It'll open up a bicep. And just a snap cut like that, you'll cut a big V-shaped wound in that and destroy the bicep with just a quick, brief movement of your wrist. It's got a reinforced point because the blade spine runs up to within a ½ inch of the very terminal end of that tip. Very, very thick spine all the way up to that tip. It's a very strong knife. It has really good cutting power. You can't go wrong with a tanto from cold steel, a full-size tanto like this with a 7.5-inch blade. Terrific fighting knife. Anytime you see an opponent armed with a full-sized fighting knife, you're in a heck of a lot of trouble. It's a lot easier to deal with someone with a short blade, and we're going to go into this later, than it is with a long blade. This is extremely, extremely dangerous compared to a small knife or even a tactical folder like this. This is a lot easier to deal with than something like this. These are really dangerous knives. Going up the scale of force, we get into big knives. A big knife like this Trailmaster can cut your arm off above the elbow or your knee off your leg off above your knee. Right here, a stroke like that will cut your leg off. A knife like this will cut your head off in a single stroke. It's a devastating fighting knife. It can maim you with one blow. So when you see somebody armed with this, you're in a lot of trouble. At the same token, if you're carrying a knife like this, you're in a very, very powerful position. You have a lot of power, a lot of cutting power, and a lot of stabbing power at your disposal. It's hard to find a disadvantage to this knife. There's so many advantages. I could go on and on and on about why you should carry a big fighting knife. When we make our training knives here, our foam trainers, we make them the size of this Trailmaster Bowie, because this is what we really suggest you carry, a knife this size if you really want to have all the advantage in a knife fight. The only disadvantage, though, is its weight. These knives weigh about 16 ounces. This one has a 9.5-inch long blade and a 5-inch handle, so it's got 14.5 inches overall length. That's a lot to conceal. It's harder to conceal these knives. You can conceal them with a little effort. Hey, it's not as hard to conceal a Trailmaster as it has a medium frame 38 special. So don't get me wrong, it's not that you can't conceal these, it's just a little bit more harder to conceal them than a full-size knife or a boot knife. The main disadvantage is weight. It weighs 16, 17 ounces, and it's long. But it brings a lot of power. Even going up further is our Laredo Bowie. This has a 10.5-inch long blade. It's got a false edge here on the top so I can back cut with it. It's got a very acute narrow point, so it stabs as well as a taipan. Stabs incredibly well. And it's got a very thick blade spine, so it's very strong. It's got a 5.5-inch handle, so you can get a grip. Even somebody with a big hand can get a really good grip on this knife. Carrying a Bowie knife as your fighter is usually a really good thing to do. A Bowie knife makes a tremendous fighting knife. It's hard to beat a Bowie, in my opinion, for a full-sized, heavy fighter. It cuts like a hatchet, even better than some hatchets. It stabs as well as a dagger. You can use the back of the blade as a bludgeon. If you want to use less lethal or less damaging blows, you can hit with the back of the blade or the flat of the blade. It's a terrific fighting knife, and I really recommend that you carry. Hey, if you don't want to carry a cold steel knife, that's cool too. But make sure that your knife is strong and sharp, and that it can end the fight with one stroke like our Laredo Bowie. That's why you want to carry a big knife, is it stops the fight right away. Going up to probably the very end of the force continuum for fighting knives is something like this Gurkha Kukri. This knife has got a 12-inch long blade. It's 5/16 inch thick here at the spine. Devastating fighting knife. It's heavy though. It's 22 ounces. Now, that's heavy for a fighting knife, but when you think about it in the world of firearms, a 22-ounce firearm isn't very heavy. A 22-ounce revolver or automatic pistol is be considered pretty light and easily carried all day long. So you can carry this knife all day long. It's just that it's pretty long overall length. It's about, what, 17 inches or so long, and it hangs down on your waist. And if you carry a big knife like this around in public, in plain sight, you're going to get asked a lot of uncomfortable questions by law enforcement. They're going to want to know, what are you carrying that big knife for? So that's the big disadvantage of carrying a Gurkha Kukri or a Laredo Bowie, is they're not politically correct. When you carry them in plain sight, they cause a lot of people to grimace and shudder, and sometimes they pick up their phone and they drop a dime on you, and the next thing you're explaining to law enforcement why you're carrying this knife. In themselves, They're inanimate objects. I've never seen a knife jump off the table, go down the street, and stab anybody. It's the evil heart of that person that does the damage, that does the physical harm, that wrecks people's lives, not inanimate objects like knives. Well, that's the end of my sermon on that. I want you to be aware, as we're conducting this presentation of all these different knives, and that they can appear on your opponent. Just because you cut the knife out of his hand doesn't mean that it's over. He could have more knives still to come. So keep that in mind, and remember that when possible, you want to carry a full-size fighting knife or a big knife. If you can't talk yourself into that, you know you're not going to do it, then carry a boot knife or a neck knife or a really effective tactical folder, one that will cut at least a 1-inch rope, free hanging with one stroke. That's a pretty good litmus test. If it'll do that, it'll serve you well in a knife fight. When I was talking about the fighting knives that you could encounter on the street, we went through the different sizes of fighting knives you might find in the hands of an opponent and their advantages and disadvantages. I briefly touched at that time on the fact that your fighting knife must be strong and sharp. I'd like to go into that a little bit more right now. When you're picking a fighting knife to carry on your person for self-defense, one of the major criterion has to be, how strong is it? How strong is the tip? How strong is the blade? How strong is the handle and the tang that runs through the handle? How strong is the lock? These are questions that you better have answered in your heart, because your life could depend on it. You see, people don't stand still when you try to stab them with a knife. Let me illustrate what I mean. I have Ron come over against the wall. Sometimes your most carefully calculated thrust, you've timed this thing to the fraction of an inch. You're almost certain you're going to strike home. But your best laid plans quite often go awry, and you stab the wall. There's a whole lot of things out there that are hard and strong that you can encounter with the tip of your knife when you miss your target. No one holds still when you try to stab them. They always move. No one stands there like a statue and says, put it right here. They're going to move. And your knife blade can miss its intended target and smash into a wall, a car door, a door jamb, a girder in a parking lot. There's all kinds of hard objects out there that can break your knife. We found in testing that if you break 3/16 of an inch off the tip of your knife, you've really degraded its ability to be an effective stabbing tool. You break a 1/4 inch off, you're really in trouble. You break a 1/2 inch off, you're really relegated now to just using the edge. You don't want to break the tip off your fighting knife. All of cold steel knives are engineered to be very, very strong and not to have their tips break like that. So you need to make sure that you're using a fighting knife that has a very, very strong tip. The other thing is, when you go to cut somebody, they move too. And your carefully timed slash that would have taken his face off just impacted the wall. Lots of times, a knife will break in half when you do that. The edge will dent or break, or the whole knife will snap in half. Sometimes people put saw teeth on the top of their knife, and these survival models, and what that does is puts a stress riser there. When you hit hard like that, the stress runs down to that first little cut in that saw teeth, and a break right there. Now you've got a busted knife. You definitely don't want your fighting knife to break when you miss your target. Along with strong, your fighting knife must be sharp. It has to have a razor edge. When you have an opportunity to defend yourself with your fighting knife and you see that opening and you make contact with your blade, it has to be sharp enough to disable that arm or that leg in a single stroke. You can't afford to have a dull knife at such a critical moment. You always have to keep your dedicated fighting knife razor, razor sharp. Don't use it for chores around the house or the farm or the ranch. Don't use it in the warehouse. Don't use it at your desk at the office. Don't cut paper with it. Don't cut cardboard with it. And above all, don't loan it to anybody else to use to cut anything with. When you pull your knife out, it has to be razor, razor sharp. Again, I want to emphasize that the blade on your fighting knife, right here I've got a 6-inch Voyager with a clip point blade. When you pull this knife out, it has to be hair shaving sharp. Just like this. Let's have the camera come in there, and you can see every part. From the heel to the tip, that blade has to be hair shaving sharp. Let me give you an illustration why this is so important. A friend of mine named Terry Register grew up in North Florida, and his grandfather owned a slaughterhouse, and Terry worked there for many years after school. One day, these two employees at the slaughterhouse got into a knife fight. I mean, these guys hated each other's guts. They fussed at each other for the last 3 months in a row, and it had to boil over sooner or later. So one afternoon when Terry was there, out came the knives. And when the fur quit flying, one guy was laying on the ground, bleeding from, it seemed like, everywhere. Blood was pouring out of him like a river. He was cut to ribbons. And the other guy was standing there in kind of a daze. And while the other employees were administering first aid to the man that was really severely injured, Terry went up to the other guy, the apparent victor, and said, "Hey, I saw you get cut. I saw his blade hit you. Why aren't you bleeding?" And so they took off his Levi jacket and they pulled up his t-shirt. And underneath, he had red wheels and weeping lacerations where the other man's knife had cut through the Levi jacket, cut through the t-shirt, but just barely scored the skin. You see, the apparent victor in the knife fight had a razor-sharp knife. When he cut his opponent, his knife bit through the jacket, bit through the t-shirt, and went deep into the flesh and did a lot of damage. His opponent's knife was dull. The man that lost the knife fight, he used his knife every day around the slaughterhouse. He cut things with it. He cut twine. He cut paper. He used it constantly. When he pulled it out to fight with, it wasn't razor sharp and it wasn't very effective. Now, there's two morals to this story. One, don't get in a knife fight. And the second one is, if you do, make sure your knife is razor sharp. Carry a dedicated knife. If you're going to carry a knife for self-defense, carry one to defend yourself with and one for utility and chores. Let's talk about the training equipment you're going to need to acquire to train with a partner in knife fighting. The first thing I think you're going to need is to make some foam and PVC pipe trainers. This is what we use the most to practice knife fighting. It's a piece of PVC pipe covered in furnace foam and wrapped with duct tape. What you do is you cut your PVC pipe, then you get fiber reinforced packing tape. You run that lengthwise, then you wind it up diagonally, forward, back, and forward again. So you're going to wind that reinforcing tape up and down the PVC pipe a couple times to make it really strong and keep that PVC pipe from breaking at any time, because you can hit pretty darn hard with these things. Then you're going to slip some furnace foam that comes in tubes over that PVC pipe. You're going to pad the tip and you're going to tape that in place, and then you're going to cover the whole thing in duct tape. You can pad the butt and the stabbing tip, or you can just leave the butt and just put the padding on the tip. Now, what we usually do on the stabbing side is we use a different color tape, usually red, so that we know that's the side that's padded, that's going to go to against your opponent's body when you stab him. These things sting. They hurt. But we've been using them since 1983, and I've yet to break a bone hitting somebody with these padded foam PVC pipe trainers. There's no doubt when you hit somebody that you actually cut them or stab them, they leave enough pain on that individual. If they're intellectually honest at all, they're going to recognize the fact that they got cut. The disadvantage of these trainers is that they don't give you constant edge orientation because they're round and you don't really know where the edge is. So what you do is you pretend the edge is always in line with these knuckles right here. Does everybody see that? So all you do is pretend the edge is right there. So when you cut somebody, you orientate your trainer like that. So it's always lining up with those knuckles. Obviously, it would be better to train with something like this. This is a rubber trainer, and you can clearly see and feel where the edges are. But we really like these trainers. If you're wearing eye protection and hand protection, you can train very safely. You can hit somebody literally as hard as you want or stab them as hard as you want. Yes, you're going to leave some bruises. If I stab you with this thing, I'm going to bruise you. If I hit you with this thing, I'm going to leave a big red welt if I hit you hard. But in 3 days, it'll be gone. When you're using all plastic or all wood knives, if I do the same thing, I'll break ribs and I'll break bones. So these are really a safe way to spar. I really suggest that you always wear hockey gloves when you're sparring. We're going to get to sparring later in this presentation, but hockey gloves give you tremendous protection for your hands and wrists. Your thumbs and your fingers are well protected. You also are going to need some leather gloves. I usually wear a hockey glove on my knife hand and a leather glove on my live hand, and we're going to explain what your live hand is later. But a pair of leather gloves will give you a lot of protection when you're just fighting with these foam and PVC pipe trainers. They'll take the hardest blow and pat it just enough, that impact just enough to where you don't get a broken bone. It'll hurt, and you're going to say more than ouch probably, but you're not going to probably end up with a broken bone. You can use harder trainers too. You can go to a rubber trainer like we made here. These type of training knives are really good for practice disarming and for solo drills and forms and stuff like that. You can use them in slow motion sparring when you're going at like quarter speed and you constantly want to practice your edge and point orientation. I mean, they bend and they're softer than a wooden or plastic knife, but if I hit you just right with this thing, I can crack your ribs and I can do some internal damage. And that's going to bend over, but if I hit you just right, you're not going to like it very well. They're a little bit up on the force continuum from a PVC pipe and foam trainer. If I wanted to, and I see a clear opening at your hand, it's possible I can break your fingers with something like this. So for full out sparring, I don't really recommend it. Going up to something even more dangerous, you have a fixed blade knife like this Trailmaster. We've taken the point and the edge off. This is really good for solo training. You need to get used to using a knife in your practice that's identical to the one that you're going to carry. I have a bunch of these. I have one in my living room where I sit and watch TV. I have one at my desk. I have one in my car. I've always got a couple of these around, so anytime I get a chance, I get to practice with them. This is the knife that I usually fight with, and this is the one I practice with the most. These are really good for, like I said, for solo training. You don't really want to spar with these things because I can easily break bones and damage internal organs with this. If I hit you in the arm with this, and there's no edge on this thing, but I'll break your arm. If I go like that on your fingers, I'll bust your fingers. So this is more for solo practice and to get you used to handling a weapon that's identical to the one you carry. You always want to take the edge and point off these, but you want to treat them when you're practicing as if the edge and point were really there. We have these. I use a Taipan the same way, and it's a terrific training tool, like I said, for solo practice. And I usually use a Gurkha Kukri also, because this is another one of my favorite big fighting knives. You can go down and do the same thing with a folding knife. This is a 5-inch Voyager. I've taken the edge and point off, and since I often carry a 5- and 6-inch Voyager, I have a lot of these also made up with no edges and points. Again, I don't recommend this for training with a partner. I see a lot of companies selling these. We don't sell these, and there's a reason why. A lot of people will go and practice with a partner like this, and with just a moment's inattention, somebody can be blinded for life. You stick somebody in the eye with this thing, and you're going to really hurt their vision. If I stick you in the throat with this thing, you may never talk the same. The same thing with the edge. I've taken the edge off this, but if I do that on your fingers, I'm going to cut your fingers to the bone. You take that edge off, but it's still thin, and when I apply that force, it's going to either bust your fingers or split them wide open. You can make your foam trainers, just to digress, in different sizes. This small foam trainer here, we made up to duplicate a 4-inch Voyager. It's almost exactly the same length. Let's see if everybody can see that, maybe against my jacket, or I'll hold them out here to the side, and you can see that the sizes are almost exactly the same. These are really good to learn to practice against a bigger knife with. If you're going to carry a tactical folder, you better practice with a tactical foam trainer. Don't think that you're going to spend all your time practicing with this big foam knife and be able to pull it off in a knife fight with the little one. You've got to get used to this little one. What I do is I usually fight 1 or 2 rounds with the tactical trainer every time I spar. Lots of times I'll use it in my left hand too to get used to using both hands ambidextrously. It's a lot harder to use a small knife than a bigger one, but you need that practice. So when you make up your training knives, you remember you make one for your full-size fighting knife, and then you make one the same size as the tactical folding knife that you carry, so that you're practicing intellectually honest. You're being realistic in your training, and you're not kidding yourself. Now, as I touched on earlier, safety is super important. When you're doing knife training and knife sparring, the only way you're really going to get badly hurt, I'm not talking about breaking your fingers or a bruise here and there and a lump on your arm where you got smacked hard or something, is your vision. If you get this in the eye, and that's one of the reasons why we make these so big, so that you have a little bit more protection, your eye socket has a good chance to pick up some of this if somebody gets in the eye. But you don't want to get this thing stabbed into your eye when you're training. If you're wearing a 3-weapons rated fencing mask, this wire is so strong and so stiff, you're never going to be able to drive any of your training knives through this wire and into your vision. So it's really important that you always wear a training mask or a Filipino stick fighting mask. Again, you've got a real heavy wire cage that you're going to protect your eyes really well. A lot of people wear goggles. You can wear goggles when you're doing that, and they'll do a good job to protect your eyes. Remember to fit them really tight to your face. I don't like them though, because if I'm fighting people with just goggles, I'm going to bust their lips, I'm going to break their nose, I'm going to knock their ears off. It doesn't give that much protection. If I whop you in the side of the face and you got goggles on, your ear's going to balloon up like a football. That is going to jack you up. That's not going to feel good on the side of your ear and on your mouth. So I really recommend that when you're doing full-on sparring, you go ahead and you use the safety of a 3-weapons rated fencing mask. There are 6 common ways to grip a fighting knife. Let's start our discussion today with the saber grip. To execute the saber grip, pick up your fighting knife, put it in your palm, kind of diagonally like this. See how I have that situated in my palm? Curl your fingers around it. You're going to grip a little tighter with these 3 fingers right here. This one's going to have a little bit of pressure on the knife handle, but not much. And your thumb is going to go right here on the top of the handle, just like that. So that's your basic saber grip. I'll show it again. You put it in your palm like that, slightly at an angle. These 3 fingers, the last 3 fingers are going to be doing most of the gripping. A little pressure from your index finger and your thumb. Your thumb is going to go just behind the guard on the top of the handle. The advantage of this grip is it gives you quite a bit of reach in thrusting and slashing. So it gives you good reach, and it has fair security in your hand. You can hold on to it pretty good, but its real long suit is the fact that you can reach. When I lunge, quite often I use a saber grip to give me the most reach to my opponent. So it's a good grip. The only thing I don't like about it is it's not as secure as it could be. Because the thumb doesn't lock across the fingers like this. The thumb's on top of the handle, and there's a gap right here. When your opponent comes in and he hits your blade, beats your blade with his knife hand or with his blade itself, he can knock the knife right out of your hand because of this gap. Your fingers and thumb aren't locked together like this. There's a gap right here, and that makes that grip a little precarious when your opponent beats it or hits it. It's easier to knock your knife out of your hand. The other thing I don't like about it is your thumb is forward. It's pretty far forward, and the thumb is a big target in a knife fight. So your thumb is kind of exposed there, and it's easier for your opponent to get at it. You lose your thumb in a knife fight, and you're going to be 4 Fingers Wu. Now, 4 Fingers Wu was a character in a James Clavell novel called Noble House. And in that he's Four Fingers Wu, he's a triad gangster, and he has a whole fleet of junks, and he's quite a character, but he lost his thumb in a knife fight in his younger days, and ever after he was known as Four Fingers Wu. So if you don't want to be Four Fingers Wu, you always have to remember that your thumb is exposed when you're using the saber grip. But it's a grip that you should put in your arsenal because you're going to use it. Quite often you're going to switch to a saber grip from another grip. Now, a variation on the saber grip is a quarter saber grip. It's the same thing. You take your knife, you put it in diagonally like this. Instead of putting your thumb on the top of the handle like this, you just move it over here to the side. Now, the quarter saber grip is a holdover from saber fencing. Particularly in the 1700s and 1800s, when men fought on horseback a lot and they used a heavy saber, they'd quite often have a loop right here behind their guard, and the thumb would go through that loop. And that loop was there to allow the thumb to get extra power and purchase to pull the heavy saber through the stroke, and also to recover the saber. So they'd stroke down and they might come back. They'd cut this way and this way and this way and this way, and it gave a lot of control over that heavy saber. But for knife fighting, I don't see it's that useful because it still does give you reach, but it doesn't lock your thumb over. So I don't see it has any real advantage over the regular saber grip. But you can still use it because it gives you lots of reach out here, but it compromises your grip. Again, the thumb isn't locked over the fingers. Let's go to a grip that we use a lot. I call this the forward grip. In the forward grip, you put the knife in your palm diagonally like this, but this time your thumb locks across your fingers. Some people call this a hammer grip or a hatchet grip. The long suit of this grip is it has tremendous power. You can really exert maximum force when you're cutting with this. You can exert maximum force when you're stabbing. You can stab forehand or backhand, especially in hooking blows. You can stab with a rising blow like this or a descending blow like that. It gives you a lot of strength. The big disadvantage of it is it compromises your reach. When you're in a forward or hammer grip, if you will, you're giving up maybe 3 inches of reach over a saber grip. See how my blade turns from this to this? You're giving up reach with this. That's the big disadvantage of it. But it allows very powerful stabbing and slashing and cutting and chopping attacks, and you're going to use it a lot in knife fighting. The next grip I want to talk about is the reverse grip. And the reverse grip is very similar to the hammer or forward grip, except this time, instead of the blade projecting out of the thumb side of your hand, it's going to project out of the pinky or little finger side of your hand, just like this. You're going to put it in your palm like that. You're going to curl your fingers around that, and you're going to lock your finger, or your thumb rather, over your fingers, just like that. Can everybody see that? Now, the big advantage to the reverse grip is power. When I'm holding this knife in a reverse grip, I've got a locked, straight wrist, so I can bring all my power to bear. Any other grip, you've got a bent wrist, so you're never going to be able to deliver as powerful a blow with any other grip style, except with possibly a push dagger, except for the reverse grip. The reverse grip is the strongest way to hold the knife and deliver very powerful cutting and stabbing attacks. When you have your knife in the reverse grip, I'll have Ron come out here. And for his safety and comfort, I'm going to switch to a rubber trainer. So step over here, Ron. When I've got my knife in the reverse grip like this, and I see an opening, I can stab right through his chest. A blow like that will split the ribs and go right into his chest cavity. From the back, let's switch here. Hope everybody can see. Here we have the lungs on either side of the backbone. From the back, bang, I can go right through the shoulder blades, through the ribs, and on into the chest cavity. But the big disadvantage of the reverse grip is it doesn't have reach. It has less reach than even the forward or hammer or hatchet grip. You give up a whole lot of reach in the reverse grip. You see, the blade is sticking out the bottom of your hand. So instead of sticking out this way, where you can keep your whole blade in front of your hand, your blade's behind your hand. So you're giving up almost the whole blade length when you hold your knife in the reverse grip. It also makes your hand, come in here, Ron. I'll give you a trainer here. Let's come over here so people can see. Hold that knife in the reverse grip and stick it out in front here like this. When he comes on guard like that, I can come to his hand this way, or this way. I don't have to go through his knife. When he switches and holds this in a saber grip like that, I have to get past this blade to get to his hand. Now switch to reverse grip. From here, I can come this way, or here, or here. So it's very easy to come in here and slash his hand. I don't have to go through the blade. I can come in the top and cut his thumb off. I can come over here and just smash his fingers, smash the back of his hand very easily with that reverse grip. Also, because of its lack of reach, it's hard for him to defend. If I stab at his face, it's a long ways up for him to defend his face. If I attack this side of his body, it's a long ways over for him to intercept that. But here's where you use this. When Ron has his knife on guard, and I can get in here and I cut that out of his hand. Now I pin his hand. I may switch to the reverse grip right now for power. I can drive that right through his rib cage, down into his chest cavity. I can drive that right through, all the way to the other side of his abdomen. I can drive that right through his thigh. I can drive that right through his groin. I can drive that right through his head. So it gives you a tremendous amount of power, but no reach. So there's a moment in time that you use it. Now, I want to be fair to all the people that like reverse grips. There's some other things it does fairly well. Because it's a power grip, it gives you power. It also has some pretty good cutting applications. Have Ron get that tie pen. It allows me a very powerful forehand cutting hack this way, horizontal, across this way. I've got that. That's pretty powerful. It allows me a rising diagonal cut. That's pretty powerful. It allows me a diagonal downward cutting attack this way. It's quite powerful. It allows me a rising cut this way. Pretty powerful. And straight down the same way. But all of my backhand motions are weak. See, when I go to cut him backhand, let's see if the camera can get this. Forehand, it's easy to get the blade on him. Backhand, I have to really turn and articulate my wrist to make contact with the edge. This one is powerful. This one is awkward and weak. So I really don't like backhand strokes with the reverse grip. That's a real disadvantage of it. The other advantage of a reverse grip is that it helps you in hooking motions. If Ron cuts number one, I can hook his arm, pin his elbow, step behind him here, and kill him the whole time. I can drive in very powerfully with those stabbing attacks. So it allows me to hook, cut backhand, it allows me to hook and kill him. So it has some close quarter applications. We don't want to fight at close quarters, but sometimes we do when we switch to the reverse grip. Mostly when I cut his knife hand out of his hand, he drops the knife, and maybe I cut this, and I stab him here, and I switch for the kill. That's where you use the reverse grip. The next grip I want to talk about, thank you, Ron, is very similar to the saber grip. We put the knife diagonally in our palm like this, we wrap our fingers like that, and we put our thumb on the top of the handle. I particularly like this grip on folding knives because it puts my thumb out here on the top of the handle and allows me to extend it out here on the blade like this. I also like it on this knife too because I can get my thumb right here on the back of the blade and really direct that edge. I'll call Ron in here again. Let's switch places. Come over here where maybe the camera can see us. Ron, when he cuts number one, I can come in here and stop his knife hand. See this? Got my thumb right here. Right from here, I can press in with a whole lot of pressure and control and pull that edge very, very accurately through the target with a lot of pressure. Gives me a terrific press cut. Any of this stuff in here. Now this doesn't feel that great even with the trainer. You can imagine what it's going to feel like with a real live blade. So this thumb reinforced grip gives you tremendous control over the edge. It's something you want to have in your arsenal, and it's really useful when you're using a folder, where you don't have a lot of weight, and you need to get all the power and all the accuracy and harness everything you can into that cutting stroke. Putting your thumb here on the back of the blade like that can really help you. Now, thanks, Ron. The disadvantage of the palm, or rather the thumb reinforced grip, is that, again, your thumb is exposed. It's probably even more exposed than it is in the saber grip. It's really flat out, straightened out like that, well ahead of the rest of the fingers. So you have to keep that in mind that your thumb is vulnerable there. But it's a good thing to know how to do. It's a good grip to have in your arsenal. The last grip I want to talk about is the palm reinforced grip. Palm reinforced grip, to execute it, you put it diagonally in your palm like this. Except this time we're going to shorten it. We're going to put the butt right here in the middle of our palm. And our fingers are going to wrap around the handle to control the point and the edge. Now the long suit of this grip is again on the thrust. When I'm lunging thrusting attack, it gives me maximum amount of reach. So the long suit, or the main advantage of the palm reinforced grip, is it gives you the maximum amount of reach that you can get with your fighting knife. The drawback or disadvantage is, again, your integrity of your grip is compromised. Your fingers aren't wrapped all the way around the handle like that, and your thumb isn't locked over your fingers. So when you have your knife in a palm reinforced grip, it's easier to have the knife knocked out of your hand. This is a type of grip that you're going to switch to quite often in a knife fight. You may be in a forward or hammer or hatchet grip, if you will, and you may be cutting and fighting here. And you see your opening, you're going to switch to a palm reinforced grip and thrust. And you're going to do it without thinking, because you're going to practice the transitions from one grip to another. And we're going to show you how to do that later. It has a lot of advantages. I like the palm reinforced grip because it gives you the reach. And it's an excellent way to use a knife for thrusting when you don't have a guard on your knife. If there's no quillions here or no guard, you can use the kitchen boning knife in a thrusting attack by just putting the butt like this in your palm. Hope everybody can see that. And just controlling the handle with your fingers like that. And what happens is when you make impact, the butt of the knife goes into your palm and keeps your fingers from going forward. There's no way that your hand can go forward onto the edge, even when you don't have a guard, when your knife's held in a palm reinforced grip. So it's a good way to wield the knife when you don't have a guard too. Now you want to practice switching your grip too. Like I said, you can go from the hatchet or forward grip to the saber grip to the palm reinforced grip to the reverse grip. Now when you get to the reverse grip, quite often you're going to cap the end of it with your thumb, especially when your knife doesn't have a guard. We have double quillions here, and they'll keep your hand from sliding down onto the blade. But when you don't have a guard or quillions on your knife, it's really good idea to cap the pommel or butt with your thumb. And when you hit something hard, your thumb will stop your hand from sliding down onto the blade. So you also need to practice switching your grip from a forward grip to a saber grip to a palm reinforced grip to a thumb reinforced grip, back and forward all the time, until you get really, really comfortable switching grips. This concludes the training we're going to do in this volume. Remember, repetition is your friend. You need conditioned reflexes, and the only way you're going to get them is to practice these techniques thousands and thousands of times. Remember your safety. Always wear a fencing mask when you're training and protect your vision, as no one can replace your eyesight. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it.